know, did you know that the original Superman was killed? Yes, my friends, we're talking about the true crime case of George Reeves. Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be talking about the death of George Reeves. If you don't know who he is, he's the original Superman, and he played Superman from 1952 to 1958 in the television show Adventures of Superman. Now, if you are new to my channel, hey, I'm Liz. This is my true crime channel. It used to be called Creating Crime Time, but I decided to take a step back from my art and focus more on my crime. Now, there will be art involved in other videos. I have some ideas for some other risque, celebrities that I'm going to be covering this month. And this month, too, we're talking about all celebrity death, mysteries of disappearances, solved death, unsolved crime, all of the above. I'm covering it this month. I felt that I needed to do something that is popularized, but not to the extent. So like my first episode for this month was about Jean Spangler, who was a bit part actress who went missing, who has ties to Kirk Douglas. I'll put that in a card somewhere. And also, like, we're talking about Marvin Gaye. We're going to talk about River Phoenix. I'm going to talk about them all this month. Well, that would be a long list, but still, I'm going to talk about a lot of celebrities that have been in controversy when it comes to their death, their mysterious disappearances, and all of the above. So, I know that was a long spiel, but if you haven't subscribed, I highly suggest you do so. Click that red button, turn your bell notification on all. That way you know whenever I upload, because I upload Monday through Friday. Mostly Monday through Friday. Sometimes there's some days where I'm not like, meh, like yesterday. May 2nd. I didn't upload on May 2nd, but that was because I had other engagements and I had to, focus on those. So, with that being said, let's get into today's true crime case, shall we? So, George Kiefer Brewer, or George Reeves, he was born on January 5th of 1914 in Woolstock, Iowa. He was the son of Donald Brewer and Helen Lesher. He was born 5 months into his parents' marriage. So she was already pregnant when they got married, which was a no-no that early in time. They would not be married very long. They separated shortly after he was born. And it's at this time when George and his mom, Helen, would end up moving in with relatives in Ashland, Kentucky for a while. And then they would move to Galesburg, Illinois. So his mom was German descent. She moved to California to stay with her sister. And this is later on. And this is where she met a man named Frank Joseph Basolo, and they married in 1927. That's according to censuses that are on record. Now, his father went on to remarry as well to a woman named Helen Schultz in 1925. George never saw his father again, ever. Now, his stepfather, Frank, would end up adopting George in 1927, and he would end up taking his stepfather's last name. So he became George Basolo at this time. And he really looked at his stepdad as being his father figure. Now, their marriage wouldn't last past 15 years, and it ended in divorce. And they separated while George was visiting their relatives. Now, when he returned, his mother told him that his stepdad had committed suicide, when in actuality, Frank was still alive, and George didn't know it. Frank died in March 4th of 1944 at the age of 51. And this is when George was well into his acting career. What a bitch. I get why parents do things like that, but you could have just told him that you divorced. I wonder if it was so that he wouldn't get discouraged by his father figure being gone. But anywho, so he began acting and singing when he was in high school, and then he went on to continue doing so at Pasadena Junior College when he was a student there. So he went on to study at the Pasadena Playhouse, and this is when he ended up meeting his future wife, Eleonora Needles. She is the granddaughter of John Robinson, who was a circuit circus magnate. They ended up marrying on September 22nd of 1940 in San Gabriel, California, at the Church of Our Savior. They ended up having no kids, and they divorced about 10 years later. So his film career started in 1939 when he was cast in a role called Stuart Tarleton for... This is one of Scarlett O'Hara's suitors in Gone with the Wind. So this is his first full acting. But in the credits, there's a misspell. There's a misprint. They have him listed as Brent Tarleton instead of Stuart, which I think is really funny. And they even know that it's listed incorrectly. So this was a minor role, but him and Fred Crane were in the opening scene of the movie. Now, Fred Crane was also a television actor for this role. Him and Fred dyed their hair red because the Tarleton twins had flaming red hair. And after Gone with the Wind was filmed, George then returned to the Playhouse, and he was then given a lead role in Poncho, which is a play. Now, this part would lead him to being contracted by Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers then changed his name to George Reeves. So if you don't know, a lot of people that are acting have stage names. A lot of people don't go by their real names. So George Reeves is one of them. Another actor I want to cover, William Desmond Taylor. That is not his real name. That's just his stage name. So it's like a lot of people like to change up their names, or who they have a contract through will change it for them. So his Gone with the Wind scene credit reflects that change as well. So they already had it in there as George Reeves. And this change happened between the start of production for Gone with the Wind and when it was released about a year later. And there were several films on his contract that were made and they were released. And it truly made Gone with the Wind his first film role, but in actuality, it was actually his 5th film release. So he also starred in 2 short reel subjects that appeared in several different B pictures. It included 2 future presidents of the United States, Ronald Reagan, and this was with Torrid Zone, the Fighting 69th, and Strawberry Blonde. Those are the little bits with him. It also had James Francis Cagney Jr. in them too. He was also very well known at this time for his onstage presence, and he was very energetic. So these little roles that he had advanced his career, and unfortunately his contract with Warner Brothers would be dissolved with mutual consent. So now he's released from Warner Brothers. He then goes to 20th Century Fox, but he was actually released only after a handful of films that were created, one of which was Dead Men Tell with Charlie Chan. So 20th Century Fox ended up loaning him to a producer, Alexander Korda, with Merle Oberon for the movie Lydia, which was an absolute failure. And it's after this is when he freelanced. And then he started finding work in Western movies. So his friend Teddy Sherman introduced him to his father, Harry Sherman, who was a producer. He then asked Reeves to do a screen test with Teddy for a Hopalong Cassidy film. They impressed the casting director by performing a 7-page script of a single take without any pause. George then appeared in 5 Hopalong Cassidy westerns before he was casted as Lieutenant John Summers. This is opposite Claudette Colburn in So Proudly We Hail. Sorry, that came out in 1942. That was a war drama by Paramount Pictures, of which they then signed Reeves up for 2 films a year. So Reeves was inspired by So Proudly We Hail, and this put his acting career on hold because he ended up enlisting in the United States Army, and he was drafted in early 1943. So he was assigned to the U.S. Air Force, and he then performed in the Broadway show Winged Victory for the United States Air Force. So that was a long Broadway run that followed the national tour of and a movie version came after that. So George was then transferred to the United States Air Force's first motion picture unit, where he made training films. He then would be discharged at the end of World War II, and he returned to Hollywood. Now, many studios slowed down their production schedules, but some production units had completely shut down. He would end up appearing in outdoor thrillers with Ralph Bird, and there was, after much more time had passed between acting jobs paying less and less, he then had to go to low budget serial like movies that were produced by Sam Katzman. One was The Adventures of Sir Galahad, and then he ended up taking a second job, which was digging cesspools. George fit rugged requirements when it comes to roles, and he had such a good memory when it came to his dialogue that he did well under a rushed production. He was able to play against and starred as a gold hunter in the Johnny Weissmuller Jungle Jim film. After this that's when him and Eleanor Needles would separate and divorce. They were divorced, and because of their divorce, this is when George moves to New York City in 1949. Well, they're separated. Their divorce isn't finalized until 1950. So he then performs on a live TV anthology program, as well as one on the radio. But he ended up returning to Hollywood in 1951 for a role in Rancho Notorious. So in 1953, he then plays a minor character named Sergeant Malin Stark in From Here to Eternity. And this film won an Academy Award for Best Picture, and it gave George a distinction of appearing in 2 Best Pictures. So in 1951, he was offered the role of Superman, and this is for the series Adventures of Superman. So he initially was really like, what? But like many actors at the time, he considered TV unimportant and believed that very few would actually see this. So the hour-and-a-half films were shot on very tight schedules, and there was 2 shows that were made every 6 days. And according to different sources, the Adventures of Superman DVD sets and multiple scripts were filmed simultaneously. That way, it took advantage of standing sets. So basically, all of the Perry White's office scenes for 3 or 4 episodes would be shot on the same day, and the various apartment scenes would be done consecutively as well. So George's career as Superman had really begun with Superman and the Moleman, which was a film that was intended to be a B picture and as a pilot for the TV series. And after completing it, George and the group began the production of the first season's episodes, and all shot over 13 weeks during the summer of 1951. Now, that following year, George was amazed by him becoming a celebrity because of this. Now, in 1952, ABC struggled to purchase the show for national broadcast, and it gave him a much notable notoriety when it came to this, and he was more visible. So the cast members of Superman had very restrictive contracts, and it prevented them from taking other work that might interfere with this, except for the second season. Now, the schedule was brief. There was 13 shows, shot 2 per week, and a total of 7 weeks out of the year. But all had a 30-day clause, which meant that producers could make their exclusive services for a new season on 4 weeks' notice. So if they wanted to make a new one, then bam, you needed to be there. This prevented long-term work on films with long schedules and stage plays that might have lengthy runs or any other series work. So George, however, earned other income for personal appearances. He had the affection of young fans. He was a very handsome man. He took on his role model status very seriously. He didn't smoke cigarettes where children could see him. He eventually just altogether quit smoking. He kept his private life very secret, even though he had a romantic relationship with a married showgirl, Toni Mannix, who was the wife of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM Studios. He was having an affair with Eddie Mannix's wife. There's a documentary that came out called Look Up in the Sky, The Amazing Story of Superman. And it's when Jack Larson said he first met George, and he told him that he enjoyed his performance in So Proudly We Hail. And according to Jack, George said that if Mark Sandrich had not died, he would not have been there in this monkey suit. And also, according to Jack, he said that George said he felt better about the role. He would feel better about the role knowing that he had any adult fans, and never learned that Adventures of Superman had adult fans during its original broadcast run. because he thought it was just for younger kids, but a lot of older, like adults, actually enjoyed the show. So between the first and second seasons, George got sporadic acting assignments. And there was one anthology program for TV and then 2 feature films, one called Forever Female and then Fritz Lang's Blue Gardenia. And by the time the series aired, George found himself fully associated himself with Superman and Clark Kent. It was very difficult for him to find other roles because that's all people put him as. So it's a lot of like people associate. He's like guilt by association because he plays these roles. So it can kind of really like suck. So George worked tirelessly with Toni Mannix, the woman that he's having a relationship with, to raise money to fight Missanthia gravis. Now, Missanthia gravis basically is a long-term neuromuscular disease that would lead to skeletal muscle weakness. And he ended up serving as the national chairman for the Missanthia Gravis Foundation in 1955. So he was really involved with this charity. He was severely involved, and he worked tirelessly to help Toni Mannix with this. So during the second season of Superman, George appeared in a short film for the Treasury Department called Stamp Day for Superman. And in this is when he catches villains and told children why they should invest in the government savings stamps. So they really are using him. They used him as like, kind of like what they did with Captain America in the Captain America movies when he first, like, after he changed to really like inspire the youth. So after 2 seasons, George was not happy with his salary and with the one-dimensional role he had. And he was now 40 years old and he wanted to quit and move on with his career. The producers started to look elsewhere for a new star. Now, George ended up making his own production company, and he ended up starting his own TV adventure series called Port of Entry, which would be shot on location in Hawaii and in Mexico. George wrote the pilot himself. However, Superman producers then offered him a salary increase, which would give him about $5,000 per week, which in today's time would be about $50,000 a week. And this would last for 8 weeks, which is the total production of the show. So about $5,000 for 8 weeks. So about $40,000. So you'd get about $40,000. And about today's time, that would be about $400,000. So as for his project Port of Entry, he was never able to gain financing for the project, and it was never made. So in 1957, they ended up thinking about releasing Superman as a film called Superman and the Secret Planet. Script was made by David Chandler, who wrote many different TV scripts. But in 1959, however, there was negotiations for a renewal of the series, of which 26 episodes were scheduled to go into production. By mid-1959, contracts were signed, costumes were fitted, and new playwriters were assigned. Noel Neill was quoted as saying that the cast of Superman was ready to do a new series of a very still popular show. So George's good friend Bill Walsh, who was a producer at Disney Studios, gave George a prominent role in Westward Ho! The Wagons, which came out in 1956, in which George then wore a beard and a mustache. This would be his final film appearance. So he attempted to show his versatility, as well as when he sang with Tony Bennett on stage in August of 1956. He then went on to appear as Superman in I Love Lucy, which is episode 165, Lucy and Superman, in 1957. So Ben Weldon, who is another character actor, had acted with George in Warner Brothers days, and he frequently guest starred on Superman. He said that after I Love Lucy happened, Superman was no longer a challenge to him. He enjoyed the role, but he used to say, "Here I am, wasting my life." So George, Noel Neve, Natividad Vasio, and Jean LaBelle, and a trio of musicians, then toured publicly in different appearances for the show in 1957. Now, the first half of the show was a skit in which George and Noel performed with LaBelle as a villain called Mr. Kryptonite, and he captured Lois Lane. So George would then rush off stage and return to Superman, who came to the rescue and fought the bad guy. The second half of the show would be George out of costume as himself, singing and playing the guitar. Vasio and Neil accompanied him in duets. So George and Toni Mannix ended up splitting up in 1958, and George then announced his engagement to a society playgirl named Lenore Lamont. George was apparently supposed to marry Lamont on June 19th and spend their honeymoon in Tijuana, Mexico. So he ended up complaining to his friends and columnists and his mom about his financial issues. So because he wasn't making a lot of money off of Superman, but yet they were still contracting him to do so. So kind of like, you know what I mean? Well, there was a planned revival of Superman that apparently had a very small lifeline. And George had always hoped to direct a low-budget science fiction film written by a friend, and this friend was one from his Pasadena Playhouse days. And he had discussed the project with his first Lois Lane, which is Phyllis Coates, that previous year. However, George and his partner failed to find the financing for the film, and it was never made. Another Superman stage show was scheduled for July, and with a planned stage tour of Australia. George had options for making a living, but those options apparently all involved playing Superman again. And it was a role that he was not eager to do at the age of 45. So Jack and Noel both remember George as a very noble Southern gentleman. Even though he was from Iowa, he was very he had the hospitality like he was from the South. And during a publicity trip to the South, the sign on his dressing room door was replaced with a new one that said Honest George, also known as Colonel Reeves. This was created by the prop department for the show, and there was also a photo of George smiling, and the sign appears in Gary Grossman's book about Superman. Let's get into the fun part, shall we? So, George died from a gunshot wound to the head in the upstairs bedroom of his home in Los Angeles at 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive in Benedict Canyon. This happened between 1:30 a.m. and 2 a.m. on June 16th of 1959. This is according to the LAPD report. So in some news articles, Lenore says that George attempted suicide because his depression was caused by his failed career and his inability to find more work. The LAPD stated that George was depressed because he couldn't get sort of parts that he wanted. Now, the newspapers and different wire service reports quoted the LAPD sergeant, who was V.A. Peterson at the time, saying that Miss Lamont blurted, "He's gonna shoot himself." A noise was heard upstairs. She continued, he's opening a drawer to get a gun. A shot was heard. See, there, I told you. That's really fucking fishy. I'm sorry. It's really fishy. Now, the official story that was given by Lenore to police placed her in the living room with party guests at the time of the shooting. But this is hearsay comments from Fred Crane as well, and him stating that it put Lenore either inside or in direct proximity to George's bedroom at the time of the shooting. Now, according to Fred Crane as well, who was not present at the time, Bill Bliss told Millicent Trent, who is another actress, after the shot rang out, Bliss was having a drink and Lenore came downstairs and said, "Tell them I was down here, tell them I was down here." So clearly she's got something to do with it. Now, there's a number of questionable findings when it came to his death. There was no fingerprints on the gun, no GSR was found on his hands either. So that means he did not shoot himself. The bullet that was recovered from the bedroom ceiling and the spent shell casing was found underneath his body. There's 2 additional bullets that were discovered embedded in the bedroom floor, and there was no sign of forced entry or physical evidence that a secondary person was occupying the room. Despite any unanswered questions, his death was officially ruled a suicide based on witness statements. But physical evidence at the scene and the autopsy report don't really support this claim. So his mother thought that the ruling was premature and preemptory, and she got an attorney named Jerry Geisler, who petitioned the reinvestigation of this as a possible homicide. So the findings of the second autopsy conducted at Geisler's request were the same as the first, except for a series of bruises of unknown origin on his head and on his body. But a month later, having uncovered no evidence of contradicting the official ruling, Geisler announced that he was satisfied with the gunshot wound as having been self-inflicted and withdrew. That's horseshit. I'm sorry. George Reeves did not kill himself. He was killed. I think Lenore Lamont killed him, but that's just me. Now, Reeves is buried at Mountain View Cemetery and Mausoleum in Altadena, California. He was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in the 50th anniversary of the publication 50 Who Made DC Great. Yes. So there's also controversy with this. So Alan Ladd and Gig Young are very skeptical of this determination for his death. His friend Rory Calhoun also told a reporter that no one in Hollywood believed it was a suicide. In their book, Hollywood Kryptonite, Sam Kashner and Nancy Schrodenberger made the case of the involvement of the vice president and fixer Eddie Mannix, because Mannix's wife Toni had an affair with George Reeves. Others suggested that Eddie, who was rumored to have ties to the mafia at the time, ordered the hit on George. So it's very could happen. So in the 2006 movie Hollywoodland, that stars Ben Affleck as George Reeves and Adrian Brody as a fictional investigator, which this is loosely based on the detective Milo Sparaglio. This dramatizes George's death. And the film suggests that there are three possible scenarios that could happen: an accidental shooting by Lenore, murder by an unnamed hitman under the orders of Eddie Mannix, and then there's suicide. So in June 2021, there's also an episode on BuzzFeed Unsolved that discusses the death of George Reeves as well, and other theories. So I want to know what you guys think. Comment down below. Tell me what you think. Let me know. But yes, my friends, this was the death of George Reeves, which is highly suspicious, and I don't think it's a suicide whatsoever. So with that being said, don't forget to subscribe, turn your bell notification on all, and yeah, like this video. I'll see you guys in another one. Bye, guys.